Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Homecoming Week event, Tips for Presenting on Big Stages. My name is Clinton Johnson, and I use he, him, and his pronouns. I'm the founder and one of the leaders of North Star. North Star is a community organization working to advance equity and belonging for people of the Black African diaspora in GIF, geography, and beyond. And we do this in a number of ways. One of those is that we increase opportunities for networking and collaboration, social networking, of course, but also career networking. We raise awareness of opportunities that GIS offers, opportunities in terms of academic pursuits, professional pursuits, and entrepreneurial pursuits, but also opportunities to increase equity for communities at large. So the other thing that we do is we promote and enable folks to use GIS as a tool for advancing equity. So before I tell you a little bit about the homecoming, I want to thank our sponsors. As a bunch of organizations came together, including Critigen, folks from Critigen, folks from Here Technologies, particularly the equivalent group Unity and Power that focuses on people of African descent, North Star, of course, and Spatial GIS. We're also partnering with African women in GIS on this session as we do on this event series, as we do with many other sessions. And we all came together to create space around the Ezra User Conference for people to connect for the purpose of fostering community and equity, specifically for people of African descent in GIS, geography, and beyond. And every year we meet and we discuss what's going on in the previous year, and we come up with a theme. This year, that theme is creating and innovating through and beyond the pandemic, recognizing that last year was unprecedented. And while everyone in the country and around the world were dealing with the pandemic in very much the same ways, in Black communities across the globe, particularly in the US, in the UK, Black people were experiencing this pandemic a little bit differently. So while we were all in it to help using GIS in any way we could to help organizations and individuals respond to the pandemic, some of us were also dealing with some of those racial disparities in hospitalizations, cases, and unfortunately deaths. Recognizing all of that struggle and all of the innovation and creativity that took place throughout the pandemic, we want to create space and opportunity to discuss it, but also start to look towards the future and what comes beyond this pandemic. There's been a lot of events this week, beginning this past weekend, with a happy hour and then a welcome event that essentially served as our keynote, where we introduced everyone to this concept of the homecoming and the theme for this year. Monday and Tuesday, there was an African Women in GIS research symposium. There was a careers in GIS panel discussion where folks shared their own career journey in GIS. We'll get a little bit of that today, but mostly we're focused on getting tips from these expert presenters. And there was an education spotlight where the C3 initiative took us on a journey and used GIS to try to tackle a fictitious challenge that's very much real. And there was an African Nations happy hour and a happy hour also situated time-wise such that it served the Americas. And here we are today at the Tips for Presenting on Big Stages. And later on this evening, be sure to stick around for the HBCU Spotlight, where Dr. David Paget from Tennessee State University and his students will talk about an important project that they've been working on for a while around Africatown. And be sure to register for the Ezra User Conference so you can attend the Homecoming Special Interest Group, our sort of final event for the event series. Today, we're going to begin with some introductions so you can learn a bit about our speakers today. We'll just talk a little bit about their journeys into GIS, how they got here, and then we'll have them share that one thing. What's that one tip that each of them thinks that the people should think about, consider as they are preparing for presenting on big stages, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. So let's get right into it. And I want to introduce you to Demaya Curry and Elvis Takao. I'll let each of them um, share a bit about themselves. We'll start with Demaya. Why don't you talk briefly about your role here at Esri and the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. My name is Demaya. I work at Esri as a product engineer writer. I started back at Esri back in 2020 in August, so I am coming up on my 1 year anniversary working here. And as part of my job, I primarily write non-reference and reference content. So things like blogs, I make a lot of videos, I write lessons for the Field Apps team. And I primarily write content for Arcgis field maps. And since being at Esri, I've been able to learn a lot. I've been able to make a lot of cool content with my team and also do a little bit of presenting at a few conferences, namely Dev Summit, the Federal GIS Conference, and UC this week.
Thanks for that, Demaya. Dr. Takao, why don't you go next?
Thanks, Clinton, and thanks everyone for the opportunity. So my name is Elvis Takao, and I am a solution engineer at Esri. I'm part of a team that's focuses on natural resources, which covers a couple of different sectors, primarily petroleum, pipeline industry. We have forestry, we have a renewable sector, we have mining, and we have commercial agriculture, which is my primary focus. So as a solution engineer, my main role is really about showing our clients how to utilize geospatial technology to solve their different business workflows. So in my role, I develop proof of concepts around different technology applications within our suite of technology that really focus on using location to drive the workflows and implement that technology for our customers. I have been at Esri now. I'm starting my 6th year and looking forward to, what lies ahead.
Thanks, Elvis. Elvis and I actually started around the same time at Esri. We were in boot camp together, at least for some of the courses,
Yeah.
and very different roles, right? Um, and yet all of us have, of course, had opportunities to present. So it's really interesting to see how people from different backgrounds and with different areas of focus still often find opportunities where they can, show up and present and talk to folks about their work, the technology, and ways that they can leverage the technology to get things done in their own missions. So why don't we start talking about how you all got into GIS? And this time, maybe we'll start with you, Dr. Takao.
Sure. So I have a non-traditional journey towards GIS. Hopefully we all started somewhere back in academia. And with me, I went to school at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, where I started off, as a biochemistry major, because my dad had this great and grand vision that I was going to be a doctor, my brother was going to be a pharmacist, and we'd work together and all this stuff. But that didn't work out. But I quickly moved into natural resources and landscape ecology, which is where I got my undergraduate degree. And then I stayed at Texas A&M a little bit longer because I was offered an assistantship, and I did my master's at A&M as well in landscape ecology. And then finally, I did a PhD in landscape ecology and spatial analytics. And somewhere during my sort of bachelor's, I think it was around my junior year, I was introduced to GIS as an elective. I needed another elective to finish my course of study, and it was a GIS class. And I was just intrigued by the things you could do specifically around solving problems. And it just got me thinking. I was like, this is amazing. Is there a major that focuses on this stuff? Because I love solving problems and dealing with challenges. And when they're when they're spatial in nature, it even makes it more intriguing. So that led me to, taking a few more GIS classes. And then I had a project that I started working on for my master's that really focused around looking at location and where different grape varieties are grown and the impact of climate and soils and stuff like that. And it was an inherent GIS problem. So I started doing more and more research and getting more involved and using more Esri technology as well as other spatial technology. one thing led to another, and I started applying for different jobs as I finished my PhD. I was also doing research at Texas A&M, and here I am at Esri. They made me an offer, and I couldn't refuse it because it was really the technology that I started using throughout my research, and so it just sort of organically happened. And almost 10 years later, here I am, and GIS is at the very core of everything that I do. So
That's a really interesting journey. I've met a lot of people who came at this from a biology perspective or some other science that they did not think of as inherently related to GIS or geography, but came to somehow bump and connect with GIS. So it's always interesting to see some of those journeys sort of articulated. How about you, Demaya?
Yeah, I also came to GIS through academia. I studied geology at Pomona College, and it was in my geology classes that I was able to work with a lot of ArcGIS software, a lot of mapping specifically for tectonics and things like that. And looking back, I remember that being like a really fun aspect of those classes, being able to do mapping and be out in the field and take that back and kind of work with the software in the lab. And I really enjoyed that. So that was kind of my introduction to ArcGIS and also Esri. And then when I was in college, I was really interested in the, I guess, intersection between science and technical information and also storytelling. And I knew that once I graduated, I really wanted to kind of merge those two interests and work in a job where I was able to kind of distill technical information and communicate it to a larger audience. So when I graduated and started applying for jobs, I was kind of looking for something like that. And hopefully it would have a geology or geography kind of spin or context to it. So when I found this job, it was kind of all of those worlds coming together and kind of all intersections really being applied into one position. So, and thankfully I got it after I applied. So, yeah.
Cool. I'm thankfully you got it. We're all glad you got it too. Before we get into that one thing, maybe you should let folks know what you have been presenting and what you will be presenting at the UC this year.
Go first. So I presented Monday, and my presentation was Intro to ArcGIS Field Maps. So Field Maps is a pretty new app that was released last year, and our presentation was really focused on kind of providing that introduction for users and telling them, this is what this app is and here's what's new. So I kind of presented on giving some demos of how to walk through and do specific capabilities on the app. So that was the one and only presentation that I have for UC this year.
How about you, Elvis?
So similar to Demaya, my presentation really focused around field mobility. So instead of focusing on one application, field maps like the one she talked about, I was part of a panel where we were talking about our field mobility sort of ecosystem of applications. So including field maps that Demaya presented on, but there are other web mobile applications that are in Esri suite. So we had a panel discussion where we had a bunch of the product managers and product engineers, along with folks like myself who work with our constituents and we work with our users to answer questions around our mobile technology, the direction it's headed in, the new developments, current functionality, you name it, what problems our users may be facing, challenges they're facing, suggestions they would like to see implemented into the application. So that was my presentation or panel discussion, really focused on those aspects of our field mobile suite.
Cool. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
both of you. The other aspect of the homecoming and one of the things sort of underpinning North Star, and one thing that we really want to focus on this year is that our differences are a value. They are a strength. And as much as there are those things that we have in common that in some ways unite us, it is also those things that we have in terms of differences that strengthen us, right? That amplify our impact, that make it such that all of our individual parts truly do become much greater than the sum of our whole. So now we want to hear from each of you, as you think about presentations you've done in the past, presentations you anticipate doing in the future, what is like one really important tip that you would share with folks? And we'll start with you, Demaya. What's something that you want people to really think about as they prepare?
Yeah, I think one really important thing is that when you're first starting out the process of planning your presentation, I think first and foremost, it's really important to lock down and kind of establish what the intent of your presentation is. I guess in other words, kind of understand what you're intending to do with this presentation or really what your goal is. So for example, if your goal is to inspire people to check out a product, make sure you are understanding that from the very beginning, because I think when you have that understanding, it's really going to shape your whole process going forward. It's going to shape what you make or how you structure your presentation. It's going to structure what you're going to say and how you deliver your presentation. So I think that having that as your first step is really, really important.
What do you think of that, Elvis?
I agree with her. That's actually one of my personal tips that I undertake as well. But I would add to that one of the things that I try to keep in mind with every presentation that I do is, in a way, I try to transport myself and put myself in the shoes of the audience, right? So if I were sitting in that audience listening to a presentation on that topic, what would I want to take away from it, given whatever the topic is, right? So I literally put myself in the audience shoes and I use that to actually structure my presentation. I'll do research on the audience and really try to understand who my audience is and what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what their preferences are. You may not always be able to get that information, but making that attempt to put yourself in the shoes of the audience, I think ultimately leads to a better presentation, because then you have some empathy for the audience and the folks that you're actually presenting to. And I think it really changes the way you do that presentation. And I sort of wrap all of that up with telling a story. People love stories. And if your presentation tells a story and you put yourself in the shoes of the audience, I think more often than not, it leads to a good presentation if you put in the time to prepare. So
Purpose, empathy, story, taking the time to prepare. Like these definitely sound like the main ingredients for, the tastiest, the most the most delightful presentation. Um, you know, and and absolutely, in my experience, all those elements work for sure. And so when you think about, putting yourself in the shoes of the audience and trying to understand who they are, and you're crafting a story with a purpose, well understood, who do you typically, use as the character in your story? Like who's in focus in your story? Is it yourself? Is it the audience?
so I don't know that it's one or the other. I try to do a little balance of both. I do keep the audience in mind, because ultimately that's who I'm speaking to and that's who the presentation is geared towards. But I also have to keep myself, in focus as well, because I want to also present to my strengths. So whatever those strengths may be as an individual, you want to make sure that that comes across in your presentation as you keep the audience in mind, keeping them engaged. It's a fine balance, and I think it varies for everybody.
Yeah, I think people certainly come to venues like the user conference, looking to learn from the experts. So as the expert in the topic that someone is interested in, I absolutely believe there is some degree to which people are interested in you. What are your thoughts on that, Demaya?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think striking that balance will depend on the person, but having that balance is extremely important, because you are the one presenting and people are coming to hear you talk, but you're also there to give people information and make sure they come away taking something and learning something. So making sure you have that, I guess, cognitive awareness of like where you stand and also where the audience stand and how you can cater to both of those things is really important.
Yeah, agreed. And when we think about the audience, I've definitely heard folks think of talk about the audience as one person, and sometimes that's the predominant person, the person they think of as being mostly the person in the room. But I always, think of, well, hey, maybe the person who the people in the audience who represent that predominant group aren't always the same people who are the buyers or the person who's interested in who has to make the decision. And if you don't think about the audience more broadly, it just always feels like you run the risk of not speaking to everyone who you need to communicate with. What are your thoughts on that?
So personally, I try to make sure when I start my presentations to keep that in mind. I try to keep the message fairly general so that you can sort of touch everyone in that audience. More often than not, you will have a number of individuals in the audience that are, very geared towards a particular area. So I think my solution to that is try to keep things general. You can add some detail here and there, but the goal is to let the entire audience come away with that message. And you have to keep your story in mind. This is the story I want to tell. This is the message I want to convey. How do I articulate that message so that everyone from at all levels of the audience can actually understand and take away something from that message?
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say things similar to what Elvis said, like making sure like the way I communicate is general enough to where I can touch on people. And like you said, Elvis, making it, some things might be more detailed, but also making sure that at the end of the day that you're making it more general to that so that everyone can understand on multiple levels.
Yeah, I think if I haven't been doing this well enough before, after this conversation, I'm going to try to think about all of the various sort of characters or types of people, maybe based on where people may be in the stage of making decisions, or in terms of the types of roles likely represented, or industries or sectors likely represented in the room, and try to imagine characters for each one of those people in my story, and consider what questions I might have where I am their shoes at the stages that they are in, that I need to get answered in order to close the gap, so that the presentation can achieve its purpose, so they can receive that information and see themselves in the presentation, in the story, in that journey, and see themselves on their path towards whatever our purpose is, understanding field maps, learning how to use the capability of it, whatever that might be. I think I'm definitely going to start to focus on that a bit more. I appreciate all those comments. And I think I forgot to let people know that all throughout the session, you can add your questions in the Q&A and chat. But I will start to pivot over to the Q&A part, right? We have about 6 minutes left. Any questions from the audience, you can share those questions either in the Q&A feature, or you can raise your hand, and we can give you an opportunity to share your question or your comment aloud. So while people start, finding those capabilities in Zoom, what are when you think about the tips that you just shared, maybe not talking about this conference, but other presentations that you've given, and how some of those techniques or the tips you just shared help you to craft a really good story and tell make a compelling case for the audience. Is there a story that anyone wants to share? It's like such a funny thing to share the story behind the presentation.
I can give a short story. When I was presenting for FedGIS, it was my first time presenting in a plenary at all. And that presentation was interesting because the way they had framed it for all the presenter it was supposed to be a short presentation where you were talking about what's new with your product as if you were a newscaster. So they wanted to make sure you knew what it meant to communicate like a newscaster. And so they made us watch newscasters videos and watch newsreels to kind of get into that character in a way. And so that was kind of hard in the beginning of kind of taking on a new way of speaking and communicating. And it took me a little while to kind of figure it out, what it means to kind of communicate in that style. And one helpful tip that they gave me when I was kind of planning that presentation, it was recorded, so we had to have a script. But the way I had kind of structured my script made it sound very mechanical and not at all news-like. So what they made me do was an exercise where I had to kind of just talk off the top of my head about what I wanted to say and record myself and kind of go back and listen. And when I did that, I was able to kind of hear how when I'm just talking, I sound more natural, I sound more casual, I'm more relaxed. And in that way, I sound more engaging to an audience. So that was an interesting exercise to kind of get into that mode and get into that character and find a kind of a new way for me to figure out how to engage in a different kind of way.
That's really interesting. Elvis, I think I saw you about to respond.
Yeah, I think, I came in from academia where, academic presentations are a little bit different from doing, technology presentations, especially the emphasis and the focus. You're talking, a lot of times in academia, you're talking strictly to a slide and you're not really engaged with the audience that way. So when I did my first sort of big presentation here at Esri, which was the Petroleum User Conference, I'll be honest, I struggled in my preparation. And when we were doing the run-throughs on stage, one of our directors told me, don't focus on the technology. That's the given. The technology, focus on delivering your message to the audience, because I was so focused on what I'm going to click, which came sort of naturally. And I didn't put enough emphasis on the delivery and staying engaged with the audience. So, it threw me off, but, several years later, you have enough practice. And, one of my big tips is, people to actually prepare, because a lot of people go, yeah, I've got a presentation, I'm going to do my presentation, but they don't really put time aside to prepare, like literally prepare, where you rehearse it like you're actually doing it. To me, that is like key to actually getting things right. So
And I also think like one big tip when you're preparing, like record yourself, because like you don't really know how you sound to other people, but when you record yourself, you're really hearing what other people are going to hear. And you get to really see like, do I make sense? Does this sound clear? Do I sound good? So I think doing that is really helpful. I know I hate hearing myself, but it really helps me in that process.
Yeah, I wonder what that is. It's like I don't think there's anybody who really likes to hear themselves talk, but it is important, and absolutely practice and rehearsal. And there's always times when something has happened and you've lost 2 minutes or you've lost 3 minutes, and now you have to make sure you trim your presentation down accordingly. You can only talk so much faster without confusing people.
Yeah.
And so to be able to have practiced so well, and to be so well practiced that you can, make adjustments and adapt on the fly, I think is really important. I want to be respectful of folks' time, and I want to make sure you all know about what's coming up next. So first of all, thanks to our speakers here, our experts here, sharing some great tips on presenting, trying to help everybody else get prepared for their next event. And thank you all for showing up. We also want to thank our sponsors. Much appreciation to folks who believe in this mission and have invested their time and energy and support to help make it happen. So stick around, or not stick around here in the platform, but come back in 30 minutes and join the students and Dr. Paget from Tennessee State University, and absolutely show up for the homecoming special interest group tomorrow. It's sure to be a really, really great time. And we look forward to engaging with you throughout the rest of the week and next year when we see you again. So once again, welcome to Homecoming Week. I hope you enjoyed some of the previous sessions. You'll find links to the sessions. We'll probably share for folks who register, and we'll share on our website a little bit later on. Again, thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.